Well, congratulations. We've learned quite a lot. And in this section, we're going to cover Amazon QuickSight. Let's do a recap of a lot of the stuff we've done thus far. And this isn't all that we've done. We've accomplished more than just what's on here, but this is kind of a couple different variations of the basic design flow that we've gotten. Inputting our data, organizing our data, storing our data, transforming our data, and finally to the point we are at now, we're going to put it into Amazon QuickSight. So now we should talk about what exactly is QuickSight. Amazon QuickSight is AWS's analytic package for ad hoc data analysis, data visualization, constructing visual dashboards, and data storytelling. At this point in the course, we can now use our IoT gathered data sources from our JSON sensor messages sent over the MQTT protocol from our various embedded systems we programmed and stored in our S3 bucket. Okay, let's just take a minute to go over what our design flow has looked like thus far. We've collected our data via our IoT device, put it into the AWS IoT console, put it into DynamoDB, or alternately brought it over through Amazon Kinesis directly into S3. If we've put it directly from the IoT interface into DynamoDB, we've put it through the data pipeline, back to S3, transformed it with the indexing through our crawler, AWS Glue for the transform back to S3, or we've taken the CSV, the comma separated value format directly from Dynamo, and also stuck that into S3. So in any case, we have our data from our IoT device, organized, non-organized, transformed, sitting in our S3 bucket. So at this point, what do we want to do? Why don't we bring it over and load it into QuickSight and then run our analytics and our graphing to get information from our data, which is a big part of IoT, as well as touching on many other fields. So let's get into Amazon QuickSight and see what kind of things we can do to bring our data in, clean it up, and exploit it and manipulate it a little bit.
Go over here to QuickSight. And once in here, we have our old analysis and we can run a new analysis. But unlike previous sections, we got to do a little bookkeeping because AWS QuickSight is one of the newer Amazon services. And therefore, there's a couple little quirks that it has that we should deal with first. Because if we don't deal with this first, at least one of these two is going to be a problem later. So here's what I would do if I were you. Go over here to Manage QuickSight, and we're going to go into the settings. Now, QuickSight talks a lot about this Spice engine here, and you can read up on the documentation. That's a really poor name, Spice, for their engine. And if you're an electrical engineer, you're going to know why, and I'll quiz you guys about that. But it certainly wasn't an electrical engineer that programmed it, and they're very proud of it. But you can see you're given a lot of capacity, and it's on the free tier, it's really hard to run out of capacity and get charged. So that's one thing nice about this service, especially compared to like AWS Glue, where you can get charged $1 or $2 pretty quickly. But go over to Account Settings. And we need to make sure of a couple of things. That you have your email in here. That's fine when you signed up for it free. I think it still has a separate sign-up process, although that'll probably be limited. But we got to go to Edit AWS Permissions to start. And I got to say two things about the permissions on this account. One is, unlike all the other sections we've done, don't mess with permissions in IAM. I made the mistake of doing that. I set my initial permissions through QuickSight, which you'll do, and then I went back to IAM and added additional permissions I thought I might need and made them over-inclusive. That completely clobbered my permission directory and my ability to use QuickSight for like a week. I had to contact the AWS developers to fix it. So only use permissions through the QuickSight application. Don't allow extra roles or requirements through IAM. That's number one. That'll probably be fixed. The second thing, it has this weird thing about the Amazon S3 buckets. Now, the professional way to do this is take the information, take our data like we're going to do from S3. You can also, if you're doing more advanced stuff, take it from Athena, which is a more advanced Amazon feature that you get charged for pretty quick and we're not covering right now. Or the newest Amazon feature, which we are going to cover, that just came out literally within the last couple of weeks, Amazon IoT Analytics. I've already said I'm an early adapter to that, so we're going to go over that really soon. But for now, we just need access to the S3 buckets. You're welcome to click all of these just to make sure, but just be aware that that's here. Now you can choose all the buckets or whatever buckets you want. If you say choose here, it'll go through your bucket directory and you can select whatever buckets you want. Now, if you remember from AWS Glue, we use this Glue Bucket 116, super catchy name, thank you. And I've put all my data sets in there that I cleaned up and transformed. And also next from our DynamoDB, I'll just upload our database CVS to Glue Bucket so we can play with that as well. But just make sure that right over here you've clicked all the buckets you want access to. Because if you don't do that, it's going to give you an error when we use our JSON manifest. and it's not going to tell us why, which is another bad thing about QuickSight right now, is when you have an error with your JSON and it's super easy to make an error, it doesn't give you any clue as to why, which is definitely a problem. So just be aware of that. And when we compose our JSON manifest, next, I'll tell you about a couple of the mistakes you can make. But really quick here, let's go download our DynamoDB that we've already constructed, and I'm going to download it as straight CVS. Now, this isn't the professional way to do it. The real way we want to do this is have an automatic transforming run into S3 and then download it right from there, and that's mainly what we're going to do. But I just want you to know that you have this option in case you want it to clean this up. So it's this test table database we made. We're going to go over to items, and I'm going to go ahead and hit actions and export this to CSV. I got to click that first so it understands all the data it wants to export. Export to CSV. Okay, you saw what I just did there. I just sped that up because I didn't want you to waste your time looking at it all. But I just uploaded directly DynamoDB, downloaded it to my local computer, uploaded it to our S3 bucket so we can play and transform that in a second. So now that that's there, let's go back to QuickSight. And what we want to do to import our data is hit this new analysis. And it's going to show all these samples that I've already constructed for myself and played with, my data sets. You don't have to worry about that. It also show your capacity here on your Spice engine. You don't have to worry about that. We just want to run a new data set. Now here we have the option to upload our CSV, and we can do that from our local machine, or since I stuck it in S3, I would hit this and I can download it from S3, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to create a manifest file. And again, this is the more industrial corporate way to do it, so it's better than just uploading a CSV and then downloading it from S3. But you can use S3, of course, to store any kind of local data you like. So in the next lecture, let's go ahead and name our data source, and then let's create our JSON manifest for downloading both our CSV that we got specifically from our DynamoDB data table and our AWS transformed S3 file that we stuck in that S3 bucket earlier in the lecture series. So let's do that next. Okay, in this part we'll name our data source and then we'll do these JSON manifests, which is a pretty important part of using QuickSight. So what we want to do first is give this an arbitrary name for a new data visualization and analytics file. We can pretty much call it whatever we want. We'll just say test 116 source. And you can call yours whatever you want. That part doesn't matter. Now the tough part is this manifest file, and there's a couple caveats about that you need to pay attention to. So if you right click, or on Linux or Mac it may be something different. I'm going to open a new tab for AWS document support on the manifest file. But basically what a manifest file, it directs QuickSight where in S3 this file is being held, and gives us a delimiter, formatter, and text qualifier for how to handle the file. So I want to use their sample and we're just going to modify it. So I'm just going to use this copy. And it's very important at this point that you edit it in something that's not going to add any superfluous characters or special characters or smart quotes or anything like that. So I'm going to use Microsoft Notepad because that's normally UTF-8 Unicode. It doesn't handle any special characters. I don't want any underlines or links or quotes or anything. So from here, now I can start altering it to make it our JSON file instead of this generic JSON file. So the first thing it's going to ask me for is either a specific file in an S3 bucket or just an S3 bucket. In this, we have just that one file that we got out of AWS Glue and our CSV that we downloaded directly and then re-uploaded to S3 from DynamoDB. For this part, I'm only going to use that file that we've transformed through AWS Glue. I don't want to mess with the Dynamo one right now, but if you want to play with that one, it's almost the exact same manifest. So I'm going to go into that Glue bucket, that S3 Glue bucket, and remember it was Glue 116, and it was this one. So what I need out of this is this link to where our file is being held. I don't need to download it for this. AWS QuickSight's going to take care of that. I just need this link. So I'm going to copy this link, go back to the manifest that we're creating, and where this link will go, because again, it's not a complete bucket, it's just a file, is under URIs. This one shows 3 of them. I only need R1. We're going to make sure we hit the opening brackets and closing brackets with our address to our S3 bucket, paste it right in there. Okay, great. And since we're taking a specific file in the bucket and we're not taking the whole bucket, we can erase this whole URI prefixes. Be very careful of where you delete it from. Starting at this comma deletion through here, all the way through there. That's correct. So I'll provide you with the sample file, and that's going to be a benefit to you because all you're going to need to do is replace this if you have the same AWS test data that I have coming out of AWS Glue. If you're using that CSV file from DynamoDB, you might have to change the delimiters a little bit here, but it should be pretty much the same. I got to make one other change before we can go on, then I want to show you a little tool we can use. Now, for whatever reason, and when we copy that, you can't tell, And I'll tell you how I was able to tell. That's not two double quotes with a quote. That's one double quote, single quote, double quote. That's not what we wanted to limit our text qualifier by, because if we go to our file, we see we wanted to limit it by double quotes here, not single quotes. In fact, we don't have any single quotes, so that won't even work. So coming back here, what I want to do is delimit it, use this delimiting character. This is a string literal escape, and put the double quotes here. So what it looks like is double quotes, string literal escape, the next double quote, double quotes. So it's kind of weird. Again, I'll provide this file for you so you don't mess this part up, but I thought I'd point that out. Now, two other things I want to mention here. If you go back over here again to our file, we do have headers. That's going to make our life easier. We're going to change those headers when we go into the tool in the next step. But for now, I'll just keep these headers here and we'll keep that as true. We have headers. So that's true. And then the final thing is, if you do a manifest and save it and it doesn't work, you can use this online tool, diffchecker.com, and it helped me figure out that really hard to detect error. The example was using a single quote, and I had tried to use a double quote. And I had to change it to a double quote because when I used a single quote, it wouldn't work at all. So that was really a helpful tool. I'll provide that in the resources. So let's go ahead and save this as a JSON. So I'm going to hard save it in Windows from my text editor, Notepad. And how I do that, I just call it rmanny116. I'll save into that directory as long as it's a unique name. And I want this as JSON. So I'm going to hard save it, JSON, and then double quotes again on that. So obviously in this lecture, we have a lot of double quotes going around. So rmanny116 JSON, save. We're good to go with that. I can let this go. Go over here, and since we're linking the address from S3, hit this. Call it the data source. That's just the name of the analysis and visualization we're going to get. This is a new name, so we'll say our data source. You can call it whatever you want. Now we're not using a URL. We're going to upload that manifest because we have it stored locally. And there it is, rmanny116. I think that's the one we just created. Open that, and then if everything goes okay, we'll just go ahead and connect. And that'll load with no problems. There we go. And now we can start going to our edit, preview, and visualizations, and we'll do that in our next lecture. Okay, welcome back. Now when we last left off, we located our data file we want to utilize from our S3 bucket, and we created our JSON manifest, which is this rmanny116. Now that we've got our manifest correct, we can go ahead and connect with it, and we can start looking through what we have as far as our glue transform CVS and start altering it. So let's go to edit preview data now that we have this successful connection. It's going to take a second here. All right, so here's what we have. We have our time, temperature, humidity, and our device ID. And while this still looks a lot better than that CSV formatted file we downloaded directly from our test table in DynamoDB, you can see that this still needs a fair amount of cleaning up. Fortunately, to do that, we have what are called Amazon QuickSight functions. Now, if you know anything about spreadsheets, and this is basically a highly advanced spreadsheet with graphics and some built-in analysis ability, they've been around forever with these functions, from Zapit to the biggest program ever written in all assembly, which is Lotus 123, Excel, LibreOffice. And right now, I just want to change these, edit these column rows here so they're not saying the full structure of what we really want. So I'm going to change this to time, and I'll change this to temperature, humidity, and device ID. I'll speed this up so you don't have to waste your time. All right, now that we've gotten that done, what we're going to do here is we don't want to operate on individual field. When we start working with functions, and I'll show you this function list, we have the option to do just an individual field function down here, or we can affect a whole column, not mess with the individual fields because we want these individual data types in each field. Even though we want to convert this to date-time format, change these to floats, and that's okay as a string. So the way to do that is hit New Field, and here is our function list. And it still has our old IDs, but that's okay. I'm going to change it to our new ones. The one I want to do, and this is the easiest one to get rid of all that ancillary, superfluous, nonsensical data that we don't want, like string, colon, braces, is this substring function. So I want to say substring function, and let's clean up the first one to start with. So the first one is time, and that's what we called it. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to make one called new field. I'm just going to call it new time. And substring in here, time, that's going to be our field. And what do I want? So substring means how many characters over starting from the left do you want to start your substring, and how long do you want it to go to? So you can go look at it and measure it. I can't move this. It's just not designed to move as a movable box. But 8 characters over our time starts, and it goes on for 8 characters. So it's basically 8, 8. And I'll show you how to count that on your own. So let's create this. and it'll make a new field going into new field 8. And there we go. You see 8 over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It starts out with that 0. And then over here, you can see the new times created. So everything worked out well. Now, I'll really quickly do that with the rest of these fields and speed that up. So this one starts over at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 as well. This is 8 as well. And this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So they all start at 8. And if we go this one, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we'll take this over 9, and this one over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14. So let me convert this to start 8, 9, 8, 9, 8, 13. So we'll just do that for all of these the same way we did before. Temp, humidity, device ID. So there we go. We have all new 4 fields, so we can get rid of these fields. And with these new 4 fields we just created, let's go ahead and convert this to float, float, and string. Okay, so again, we want to change these 2 strings, our temp and our humidity, into decimals. So to do that, we're going to have to take an extra step here, because what happens is on a few of these fields, we have this double quotation mark. So even though we had the substring taken out, we have these double quotation marks in some of these fields to deal with. So we have to do another function. And again, we can nest all these functions together, and I'll probably put on screen how to do that or in the extra resource documentation. But I'm doing it the easiest way possible for now by explicitly doing each function separately. So let's fix our temperature and humidity so when we do to transform it to a decimal, we don't get a lot of these lines taken out. So if I try to transform these cells to a decimal and they have these double quotation marks in here, what's going to happen is it's going to be a NA not applicable value, and it's just going to completely delete them at QuickSight. So we want to get them in consumable format so that we can transform them without losing any of our data. So for this step, I'm going to use the left function. So I'm just going to come in here to new field, and I'll say new temp 2. And for this one, I'm just going to say left, and our old field is new temp. We only want the first 8 digits because it's that 9th digit where we're getting that quotation mark. So I'm going to cut it off after 8, and then we'll check it out. Okay, so new temp 2. Now we have all these decimals, and we don't have these ancillary quotation marks in here. So that helps us a lot. I'm going to do the same thing with humidity. And why don't we get rid of these old fields that we're not using, because this is clogging up our display. So I have 4 fields here that I've already transformed once. I don't need them here anymore. Good. There's our 2 new fields, and these can go too. But I'll keep them in there for now till I do my next transformation. Okay, so I want to transform these. These are still listed as a string, even though we got rid of those double quotations. Now they're ready to be transformed without losing any data. So let's go ahead and transform new temp 2, and this will be our final transform before we can start doing graphs and analysis. So go back to new field, and the function we want, so I'll say new temp 3, because now we're on our 3rd and final transform. And again, we can nest all these as one transform. I'm going to say parse decimal. And it only takes one argument, and that's the old field, which is new temp 2. And then we're going to do the same thing for humidity, parse decimal. So let's try that. There we go. We got our new field, new temp 3, new temperature 3. It's correctly listed as a decimal, and we retained every single data point we had. So that's exactly what we want. I'm going to do the same thing to humidity and then clean this up a little bit. All right, there we go. We have our 2 decimal fields correct, so let's get rid of all the fields we don't need. Okay, so I just renamed these to 2 over the old one so it doesn't get confusing. So let me clean this up by let's unclick these. All right, here we go pretty much with our data set. We got our string, decimal, decimal, just like we want them for temperature and humidity. And of course, we want to keep our device ID as string. So I'll provide on screen right at this point and in the resources a combined nested statement for everything we just did, which is the substring, shift 1 over left to get rid of that double quotation marks, and then parse to decimal to change our string to decimal. Now that we've cleaned it up here, we can do our data analysis, graphing, and visualization. So let's move on to that. Now that we've finished cleaning our data, we can finally get around to doing some visualizations. So at this point, if not before, I probably want to save my data. So I'm going to name it something, let's call it environmental, and then go ahead and save it. And then I want to mention, I talked about reforming my, and now it's saved under this. I left the cap locks on, no big deal. I'll just go to edit my data set, so I'll go back to the previous screen, and then we'll visualize it. Now, I have my string data here as time, and I was going to tell you previously that I was going to change this to a date. However, whether it's a string, a date, or a decimal, when we get to the visualization section, QuickSight will still handle it correctly for our line chart. So we don't really need to mess with this now. I'll put on the screen how you can format it for the date. It's basically parse date, and then it'll give you a bunch of different formatting options for date. But as a string, it ends up being fine. And then the last thing I want to show you on this screen is close this out. If you go to this arrow here, it'll give you some additional options you can use. You can get some more text eliminators and file formatting options. So it's good to know it's there because when I first started playing with this, I didn't even see this. Close this up. Now I'm going to resave it and go to visualize so we can do our first graph. Now, what kind of graph do we want to do? We have these 4 variables in our data fields that we've already entered have data from our JSON packets. Here's all our graphing options of pre-made graphs. Now, if you used any third-party data visualization websites, you're already familiar with these graphing capabilities. Of course, QuickSight offers much more than most of these other sites, but I'll list these other sites that I've used in my previous course on the ESP8266 and Arduino for wireless and IoT, and it goes through a number of these sites like Initial State, Locent, UBDots, and I'll put all the links on the screen because those are all free sites or at least free tier sites. So if this is pretty technically challenging with AWS, these sites are much easier to deal with, and they can do pretty good graphing and even sometimes some data analysis. But let's go ahead and get a line graph. So I'm going to choose a line chart. Close this up. Now here are my dimensions, and it's really nice here too because I don't have to type anything. I can just drag and drop for at least these basic charts. So what do we want on our x-axis? That's the axis running this way. Obviously we want time, so I'm going to stick time over here. Even though again it's a string, it knows how to designate it as time and it's up here to the second, so that's nice. So let's start adding temperature onto our value. And there we go. We got our temperature for all 8 or 9 of our data intervals, and we can run averages. And you see we did a random variable unless you've actually hooked up the DHT, which I'm going to supply code for, and how to hook that up in hardware. Whether you have the random one or the actual temperature sensor, you're going to get this line here. But with the random one, obviously the more data points you get, the more it's going to be centered right around 50. So this is meaningless for a sample, except it's a pretty good random distribution. So the last thing I want to do on this is how do we add another value? So we want humidity as well. Well, we have the option of replacing it or adding it by just dragging this up and down. So I don't want to replace it. I'm just going to add it to get a second line. And there's our second line. So again, the humidity, if you've done the random sampling, was between 0 and 50. Obviously, your random graph's going to look different than mine due to your random math library variable being different. But this is pretty much it for the most basic line chart, which is the typical visualization for environmental sensor data. So we probably want to do some analysis, but let's conclude this lecture right here. And this should have been pretty useful if you've been able to do the cleaning and the parsing in the previous steps.